I'm really excited to move into the next session, why women are crucial to building communities that thrive. I'd love to introduce Marcus Glover, the moderator for this session, and a dear friend, as the founding partner of the private equity firm M. Glover Capital and board chair of Defy Ventures. Marcus catalyzes change through social impact investment and criminal justice reform. And he'll be talking to two incredible women, Lucy Lang, who was recently named as one of Worth's 2021 groundbreaking women, and she's currently running candidate for Manhattan DA, along with Valarie J. McCall, Chief of Communications, Government and International Affairs for the City of Cleveland. So a very warm welcome to you all. Valarie, first of all, hi, and those glasses are amazing.
Thank you. Something new here.
Yeah, they're brilliant. And Lucy, how are you?
I'm terrific. That was a great session. What an incredible series of events, Juliet. Congratulations and thanks for including me.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you so much. And I think whilst we wait for Marcus to join, I'd love to just start by, if you could, just sharing a bit about yourselves and the background and how you became involved in your field. Lucy, why don't we start with you?
Absolutely. I'm running for Manhattan District Attorney as a national criminal justice reform leader and a former assistant district attorney. And I really came to the district attorney's office because when I was in law school, a childhood friend of mine was brutally killed. And it turned out that the person who had killed her was her brother, who was suffering from mental illness. So I watched a family who I was close to. I watched parents and sisters go through this terrible loss, both from the perspective of someone who had experienced the most terrible tragedy and the perspective of someone who had committed it. And I saw the system failed in both of those respects. So that brought me to the district attorney's office, where ultimately I handled all manner of violent crimes, including homicides, and then created a college and prison program that brings assistant district attorneys inside New York's prisons to work on criminal justice reform issues alongside incarcerated New Yorkers. And it's that work that brought me to know Marcus and the incredible work of Defy Ventures, and ultimately brought me to the Worth community.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lucy. And Valarie, if you could unmute yourself and introduce yourself, and then Marcus, I'll hand over to you, and it's great to see you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Juliet. And it's, I just want to say again, I'm excited to be on this panel today with Lucy and Marcus. I think that this is a very, very timely yet important topic. My background is in public service. I actually went to a high school, Martin Luther King Law and Public Service Magnet High School, that prepared students who live here in the city of Cleveland that wanted to get into the field of public service. And I think I've been extremely fortunate. My career at City Hall started. They say I was the youngest empowerment zone director at the time, and I went on to become the city clerk and clerk of city council, allegedly the youngest at that time as well. And then in the current position that I'm in, I've been with Mayor Jackson since he's been mayor, and he's the longest serving mayor here in the city of Cleveland. And so I think my background is one that comes from a little bit of economic development, social work in the background, community development, public service, all bring it all together here where we do all kind of things on the local level. And I have to say, I think it's important to have a spotlight on local government and local leadership, because in the era in which we're in right now, dealing with this pandemic, most people are paying attention to what's happening on the local level because it's the closest to the people. And so in that aspect, one of the most important things you can do is serve people. And so it's in me. I think I was raised to be in it and born to be in it. And so that's where I come from.
Thank you, Valarie. And you know that I'm a huge fan of the city of Cleveland as well. Marcus, hi, it's great to see you. We're here to talk about why women are crucial to building communities that thrive. And I think you're the perfect moderator for this. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Juliet. And to my dear friends, Valarie and Lucy, I'm happy to see you. I didn't get the hot pink memo, so eyeglasses and blouse, my bad. But really, like, we've got a short amount of time, and I feel so privileged to talk to you both. You know, Women at Worth, I think, has galvanized some really amazing voices, private sector leaders. And I think this is exceptional because you guys are public servants. And so I really want to unpack some of the more crucial topics around service, women, and how we uplift marginalized communities and women. So, just kind of jumping in, and today's a pretty interesting day. We're a week away from jury selection for the trial of George Floyd's murderer, Derek Chauvin. I know that, Valarie, your city has been touched, by hardship through the murder of Tamir Rice. Lucy, I know that these are issues that you're contemplating as you mount this run for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. So I would just love to start with some reflections, like what advice would you give to the city of Minneapolis with this upcoming trial?
I love that Valarie elevated the importance of local governance, and the issue of police accountability is one incredible example of an area where we have a tremendous distance to travel, and local government can make an incredible difference. But the fact that the nation is taking note of the upcoming trial, the fact that there has been so much attention on George Floyd's murder, really is thanks to the moms. And I'm honored to have worked alongside a number of remarkable families who lost loved ones to police violence, and in fact to have received the endorsement of Sean Bell's mother, Valarie Bell, and a number of other incredible moms. And it is largely thanks to the moms, the sisters, the women, that we know as much as we know now about police violence and about the need for police accountability, and that it has been elevated nationally and is slowly starting to be addressed locally.
And Valarie, when you think about the reaction to the really touching outpouring of support for Tamir Rice, I think, as Lucy was saying, it was moms largely that were the sisters that were the power of the movement. What was it like there in your city of Cleveland?
I would tell you, it was a tough time. It's interesting being on the governmental side of that when it happens is a different perspective than just watching it from the living room or from TV. And it was heart-wrenching. As you know, I have to give the disclaimer, obviously we had lawsuits and there were some things that came out of that. But I will tell you that no matter what the circumstance, no child, no person deserved to have lost their life in that way, and the way that it was lost in a community, at a rec center, just the circumstances. But I will tell you that I don't know if I would give advice to a particular city going through this other than, hold on to truth. Truth will prevail. And no matter what the circumstances are, you be transparent and be as honest as possible. I think in Cleveland's perspective, we had some other issues that happened before then, and our mayor was the one to stand up and said, okay, DOJ, I need you to come here. I think he was one of the first mayors in the United States, and Lucy, this will be interesting, where we negotiated our own consent decree, which normally does not happen, with the mayor at the table, the police chief at the table, saying, hey, we know we have issues and we have to mitigate these. But I will tell you that on the back end of this, there's something that's beautiful that's going to transpire. It's a connection working with Tamir Rice's mom, on a dedication at Cudell Park, where Cudell Rec Center, where this has taken place. The city has approved all that. And it's a healing project that I think that long-term will not go, it will never be forgotten. And it will remind us as a community that no matter what the circumstances are, we want our officers to go home. We want our citizens to go home safely. But two, to say, let's not see this happen here again in this light ever, which means we've got to stop it and make those changes to get past the moment of what's going on.
You mentioned this being a moment of healing, and I'd like to pick up on that with you, Lucy. This is a rather interesting transformative moment where the nature of DA departments across the country are being transformed beyond the era of aggressive sentencing and over-policing and over-criminalization into models of reform. Once again, as you look at one of the most high-profile offices in the land, the Manhattan DA, what's your vision, and quite honestly, what qualities of a woman do you bring to that office?
You know, the United States is unique in the world in that we elect our local district attorneys. Everywhere else, local law enforcement are entirely appointed. And what that means is that we are uniquely equipped to call upon our local law enforcement to do things differently. And that's part of this exciting moment that's happening right now across the country, albeit perhaps too delayed and maybe too slowly. But it is amazing to see that with the 2,400 district attorneys across the country, slowly there's starting to be really transformative change where people are ending the reliance on cash bail, are exploring major alternatives to incarceration, including things like restorative justice. And one of the things that we know is that women do govern differently, that women police differently. So it's not just a question of asking victims and centering survivors, which of course it is in creating a law enforcement transformation, but also of expanding what the Office of the District Attorney is and understanding that prosecution is one tool in the district attorney's tool set. And it needs to include any number of other tools, supportive services, restorative practices, and the kinds of expansive thinking that we know women bring to leadership.
You know, I've heard it recently described that we're in, sort of the third quarter of the pandemic here. Still a lot of game to play, to use the metaphor, but it has been mentioned a few times in this conference that women in particular have been very hard hit by this pandemic. One of the areas is in the area of gender-based violence. I'm curious, Valarie, what your city and your leadership, the leadership of your government, what has it meant to somewhat supplant the needs of women? With everyone at home, there's oftentimes more violence in the home now. Lucy, how are you thinking about bringing models of healing towards victims of violence as well?
I can tell you again, and Lucy knows this. Sometimes I think local governments in particular, and smaller police forces specifically, sometimes get a bad rap on how they deal with victims of domestic violence. And I know we're talking about women, and I know that's important, but I do want to point out, as a former social worker who counseled battered and abused women and children, that they're male victims as well. And so we just want to just point that out there. But to your point, I think that there's an intuition that this isn't new, right? This is not new philosophy. Women have an intuition that I think guide us sometimes. And it's a guiding light that I haven't figured out the magic sauce of it yet, but I know that it's there, and I know that it's real. And I know that when we trust it, we lead from a perspective of what would we want to have happen if this was us on the other side of this situation, or a relative or a friend that we know or that we knew. And so I think that we have a natural instinct and we look at things differently. We have a different perspective. But I say all that to say, I do think that it is important to keep a spotlight on domestic violence and issues, because as we know, with the pandemic, with so many people at home, and there's been a lot of articles. Matter of fact, in our local paper a couple of weeks ago, our editor had put in there that people complained that they were not writing enough about the plague that the women are going through. You're trying to deal with schooling now, you're trying to deal with work from home, you're trying to deal with all these different things, and it is hard. And so I just think that, one, we need to pay attention to what's happening both nationally and locally. What is happening in DC has an impact on what happens here on the street. Why do I know that? Because local government, as Lucy knows, is the closest to the people. This is where they actually feel it. It's not philosophical. It's not a pontification. It is real hard life with realities and circumstances and consequences. And I think that the more that we understand that dynamic, the better we are collectively as leaders. And then when you get into situations like this, where the pandemic has really put this under an even smaller microscope for women or victims and or children who may feel that they're in certain circumstances. So I'm glad that you asked a question, and I'm glad that you brought that to the conversation, because it is important, and it is something that we cannot ignore and that we need to keep in the forefront.
You know, it's an area that highlights both the kind of small p policy and big P policy questions on the table. And I would love Valarie's thoughts on this, both from the social work perspective and the governmental perspective. But there's no question that police departments and prosecutors can do a better job of providing survivor-centered, trauma-informed supports to victims. And so there is this critical piece about making sure that there are social workers and clinicians available to help support survivors, that a punitive response is not always necessarily the right one. But there also are these kind of big P policy legislative examples, and we just passed a law here in New York State that is true in a couple of other states, where when someone seeks a family court order of protection, there is now a provision that they can tell the person issuing the order if there's a gun in the home. And if there is, that turns effectively into a search warrant, so that then when the sheriff, who's the person who serves orders of protection in New York City, when the sheriff goes to serve the person who is subject to the family court order of protection, who is not charged with a crime, that they can ask the person for their firearm. And if the person says no, then they're permitted to search the home for it, because there's probable cause established in the order of protection, allowing a search warrant. And this has recovered, just in the past year, resulted in the recovery of more than half a dozen guns in New York City. And we know that guns in the home are the most likely contributor to domestic violence, homicides. So that kind of use of the levers of policy can be as impactful as kind of internal policies and personnel changes.
So Lucy, I don't want this audience to think that you just Wikipedia, these facts. This is your life work. And I have gotten to know you, we've become friends, and I think it's worth taking a minute to tell the audience, you've got a pretty amazing background. And when we think about the next DA for the city of New York, as of last week, the present DA is in possession of the former president's tax returns. There is, within the last 24 hours, a certain public official who shall remain nameless, the governor, who had perhaps some out of bounds activity in the city of Manhattan. This is a big job that has to take on some really tough considerations that might require litigation. Tell us a little bit more about your background and why it would be right for you to occupy this office.
It's critically important that no candidate for an office like that say anything on the campaign trail that would suggest any political motivation in handling any case that might come before the district attorney. So while I can't comment on any of the specific matters that have gone nameless, I think that all the expanse of Manhattan's jurisdiction points to why Manhattanites want someone with deep experience in Manhattan criminal courts, in the courthouse that has impact day to day on everyday New Yorkers, on the police department that has impact on thousands upon thousands of victims in the city of Manhattan. And I'm the candidate who has deep experience responding to crime scenes, putting my arms around mothers who have lost their sons to gun violence, of working alongside women who have been horribly abused and who stood with the survivors of sexual abuse by Harvey Weinstein and worked with them to create a plan for a new sex crimes unit. But at the same time, I have worked with prosecutors across the country at operationalizing reforms designed to create targeted responses to racial injustice, which we know for far too long has been baked into the criminal justice system.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn it to Valarie. This is also a pretty incredible time. When we talked, I shared my story of in 2008, when Barack Obama ascended to the presidency, how casually it felt like an ad campaign for men of color, for the whole world to see, the most powerful man in the world as a man of color. This is an incredible moment in history. The second highest office in the land is occupied by a woman of color. What do you think it means to women of color? I have to say, I'm a Howard U grad, and I know that Kamala has the backing of HU graduates around the world, and she's going to do us proud. But would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I will say I did not graduate from a HBCU, but I did start off at Bethune-Cookman College, so I do understand what you're talking about. And I will tell you that I have a philosophy when I watch a commercial. I'm not going to name a particular commercial, but there's one that used to come on all the time, and I used to just watch the commercial and say, is it me, or there's like, they couldn't find any minorities that buy their product to put in their commercial, you know? And I say that to say, because it goes to the point that it is important for people to see people that look like them or that they identify with in leadership, in roles, whether government or otherwise. And so I think that this is a very important time. I think if you look at the women, if you look at Lucy and her candidacy, if you look at the women that have been running and the candidates, the very diverse candidates that slowly but surely have been integrated into the House of Representatives, U.S. House of Representatives, and the Senate. And we know we got to go a couple steps further there. And so I think that we are on the brink of they're making a mistake. Women are phenomenal people just by the virtue of who we are. But we're also good leaders. Do we make mistakes? Absolutely we do. But I think we humanize those mistakes differently because we may have been that person on the end that was in a meeting that had a great idea and spoke about it, and it fell on deaf ears. And then the colleague next to them who happened to be male raised the same thing. And it's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. We've been there. We understand it. But I also think this last election has shown the power of voting no matter what. And I will tell you this, in my heart of hearts, I kept saying good always prevails. No matter what you do, good always will prevail. No matter how hard it is, good will prevail. You just got to stick to it. And I think this last election, I think the leadership that we're looking at currently in our national, on a national level. And I have to say, we have to give some credit to even President Biden. When I'm watching these commercials and I'm watching the press conferences, and I'm seeing something that I don't think has been articulated into words yet, because we're just witnessing and we're in the middle of watching it. But it's powerful, the role he has taken. It is even more powerful, the role that Kamala is in right now, our vice president. But I think the long term of this, even if you look at Lucy and DAs across this country, more women are in the forefront of law enforcement. And I'm telling you, I'm kind of excited about what's going to come out of this. But at the same time, I think we're watching it and we're witnessing it. But again, I just think that this is a time that we are witnessing that we haven't seen before, without the struggle. But now we got to perform. And now we got to do results. And we got to make sure that we do it in a way that brings along people in the future. So I think it's an exciting time. I think it's a critical time. And I think it's an extremely important time where we are now in this nation.
Well, we only have a few minutes left. I want to end with a question to you each. It stems from an important woman in my life, my daughter. I'm sure I will get beat up for bringing this up, but at one point she turned to me and asked me, what specifically are you doing to elevate the women of color in your life? And as a man, I have to say, it was like watching a baseball player strike out at bat when I tried to answer that question. And yet it set me on a trajectory of change to be able to work towards elevating the women and women of color in my life every day. So I want to perhaps ask that of each of you. What are the things that we can do? What are the things that touch your work, perhaps, that can work to demonstrate change in the lives of women and women of color in this country and in your cities?
When you look at the amount of flack that Vice President Harris got for her identity as a prosecutor during the election, it really helps highlight how kind of far the conversation around criminal justice reform has come. And I would be remiss if I didn't point to the fact that while fewer than 20% of elected district attorneys are women, it is far, far fewer who are women of color. And I have to uplift the incredible work of Kim Fox in Chicago, Sherry Boston in DeKalb County, Stephanie Morales in Portsmouth, Virginia, Lenise Washington. And there are some incredible elected women district attorneys, Black women in this country, who are doing the hard work of criminal justice reform on the ground. And those women, unlike some of their progressive prosecutor white male counterparts, have to walk past Ku Klux Klansmen on their way into work every day. Those women are being canceled by the police unions every minute, and their families are receiving nooses in the mail. I mean, it is truly an incredibly difficult time to be a woman of color trying to make change in prosecution and in law enforcement. And so uplifting those women should be a priority for all of us. But thinking about uplifting women in particular, I'm reminded of a case that I handled in which a number of years ago, 2 masked gunmen came out from behind a parked car on Upper Broadway and opened fire. They hit 5 people and killed 1 who was the father of a 3-year-old. Over the course of an 18-month investigation, I became close to the mother of the man who had been killed, and ultimately we identified the gunman. They went to trial and the jury convicted them of his murder. The morning after the guilty verdict, I called the mother of the young man who had been killed, and I asked her how she felt. She was now raising her grandson. She was working 2 jobs, and she said, "I slept all night for the first time since my son was killed. But when I woke up, all I could think about were the moms of those 2 boys," referring to the 2 men who had just been convicted of murdering her son. So my life's work is uplifting her message of compassion and integrating it into the criminal justice system and ensuring that we see the dignity of everyone who touches the system while maintaining standards of equity and protecting all of our families.
And that's hard to follow, but I will say that I think, one, living by example, being an example of everything that society says you're not supposed to be. You know, I look at my life and I remember when I was in high school, a group of friends, we used to always say we didn't want to be a statistic. We didn't want to be that girl that had potential, that young Black girl who was smart, but she did this, this, and this, and went on that path as opposed to this path. I did not want to be a statistic. And that was something real that my friends we would say every single day, that we are not going to become statistics. We were going to make something of ourselves, and then we were going to get back. And that's the other part, especially as Black women, we have to be confident enough to say, okay, yes, I've got boss status, but guess what? I also have a mentorship opportunity to someone else, and I have to bring that person along. I look at the president's comms team, obviously all females, they're kicking butt. You know what? My team is practically all female. You know, and it seems like that's the first time of all females and at that level. And I'm saying to myself, we're doing it every single day, everywhere. This is what we do. And we're flexible. We're tough when we need to be. We're stern when we need to be, but we're also understanding. And so I think that we have to remember that we didn't get here by ourselves. We're not standing on just our own shoulders. And we have to remember that we need to mentor back, grab someone. Something as simple as, and I'll just say this, saying hello in the elevator. You ever get on an elevator full of people and no one, if they're on their phones, or you know what I love to do? I'd be like, "Hey, how y'all doing? Good morning. Oh, you look so pretty." Compliment somebody. Because you never know where that person is coming from. You never know where that person 2 steps shy of going and really doing something that they don't need to do. And so each one teach one and give a hand. We have to remember that it's our responsibility to bring someone else along as well. So I try to be the mentor and walk and live in that example, not sugarcoat life, because then to me, that's unrealistic expectations, but not be afraid to say, you know, okay, yes, I messed up today, but tomorrow I'm gonna go back at it. Or maybe there's a different way to see something as opposed to the way that I'm seeing it today. So I just think we have to be human. I mean, if there's one takeaway that you would say, what would you leave with the audience today? Remember, we are human beings. We are human beings. And if we respect each other that way, no matter what our differences may be, that alone will go a long way in making us a better country collectively and bringing other people along.
Well, Lucy and Valarie, it's always a privilege to spend time with each of you. This conversation can and should go on for hours, and we'll find the appropriate venue. I think we'll have to cap it where we are But each of you inspires me as a man to get off the sidelines and do my part to elevating women and creating greater equity and opportunity for women. So thank you both.
Thank you. And thank you to Worth and Juliet and Marcus. We'd love to continue this conversation with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Valarie, is that a pinata?
It is. There's a funny story to that. I have to tell you later. But it's an Angry Bird one.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.